Did you know that fishing for carp can be incredibly simple if you want it to be? Today I'm at an idyllic little secluded pond. It's got some carp in it and I'm going to show you guys how you can fish for carp with possibly one of the simplest methods you have ever seen. Let's get to it. First things first, carp fishing equipment. You've probably all seen videos where us or other anglers have been fishing on big lakes, fishing for big carp, and we've had rather a lot of equipment with us, like rods, bite alarms, a bed, an umbrella. All that stuff comes with expense and comes with complication. And when it comes to a smaller pond like this, which has got a high stock of fish, which are relatively easy to catch, you don't need to be at the water for days and nights with all your camping equipment as well. You can actually pack pretty light. So for today's session, I've got a rod and a reel. This is a float rod, about, I think it's 11 foot long, a fixed spool reel, quite small and light, designed for float fishing, a net and a net handle. I've got a unhooking mat, which is good to put fish on so that they don't get damaged. I'm sitting on that at the moment. And of course my rucksack. Within my rucksack is a small pouch, and this has got all the terminal tackle that I will need for this whole session. I've got some line, the same stuff that I've spooled up my reel with, that's 6 pound drag line, and some hooks, some size 12 hooks. They're good for the sort of size of carp that we get in this pond. Some split shot, we'll need that later on, and I'll show you when I tie up my rig why we'll need those. Float rubbers, and yeah, I got some scissors in there and a disgorger in case I need to unhook a fish that swallowed the hook a little bit. Other than that, I mean, that's pretty much it. I do have a little bit of bait on me as well, and I'm going to be introducing that soon to the swim to try and get the carp feeding in the area. But there's one more piece of tackle which I still need, and I've waited until I was at the lake to do this because I'm going to use a twig or a branch as a float for indication to show me when the fish has taken the bait. So I'm going to go find that now. That'll do. That is going to be my float. You can buy floats, you can use specially designed floats, and when you're casting long distances you need, you know, a special like plastic float or a feather based float. But this one, which I snapped off of a dead twig just now, I reckon that'll be just fine. Now that I've found the twig that I'm going to use as a float, I've got everything I need to start fishing. Before I thread the line through the rod and start tying on a hook and stuff like that, which will take a little bit of time, I'm actually going to put some bait into the water before I even start tying up the rod. That way the fish are getting confident, they're starting to feed, and they'll be waiting for me when I'm finished tying the rod up. Just thrown in some bait, and what I'm using as bait for this session is actually just small pellets. Those are specifically designed for carp fishing. You could get away with corn, you could use mushed up bread, you could use maize, hemp seed, that sort of thing. What I find on these silty lakes, something quite dark sits on the bottom, full of smell, full of attraction, and these little response pellets are pretty much perfect. I've walked up to another spot and I'm going to bait up here as well, just because when you catch a fish from a spot or you miss a bite or something like that, sometimes the fish will spook off, and when it's quite shallow water they won't come back for a little while. So having a couple of other baited areas gives me the opportunity to move spots and just fish somewhere else where the fish haven't been disturbed. And this area looks alright, so I'm going to put a few handfuls of pellets in here as well. To tie up this simple carp fishing setup, all I had to do was thread the line through the eyes of my rod, get to the end, and then take the end of the line and tie a half blood knot to my hook of choice. The hook I'm using today is a size 12. It's quite a fine wire, small hook, but also relatively strong as I'm fishing quite close to the lily pads and stuff, so I have to pull the fish quite hard. So it's important to choose quite a strong pattern of carp hook. Once the hook was on, I then took a float rubber. Float rubbers are normally used for attaching river style floats, top and bottom style, but what I'm actually using them for is to thread onto my line and then take the twig that I found in the bushes and push that into it. I'm basically using a twig today instead of a float because I don't have to cast very far. there is quite a large chance that when I hook a fish, it will run into the lily pads and break a float if I use a conventional one. And also, think about it, fish are so used to seeing twigs and branches in the water, they're never going to be spooked or scared away off of seeing a twig in the water, so it works quite well. That's pretty much it. Oh wait, no, there's also a small split shot pinched on just a few inches from the hook. You could get away with probably a smaller split shot than what I'm using, but all it really is there for is to anchor the bait on the bottom where the carp are and stop the float from drifting around on the surface. I've set my depth to about 1.5 feet or 2 foot nearly. Because this lake is quite shallow, I'm certain that that's going to be on the bottom. If you don't know how deep the water is, I would advise the use of a plummet to check the depth. We actually have a float fishing tutorial video on our channel which literally shows step by step how to check the depth, how to cast, how to shot your float, the lot. But in this video, I'm just going to take that rig, set it to about 2 foot, because I know how deep this lake is, chuck it in, and yeah, try and catch a carp. The twig is in position and there's actually a few bubbles and a few little swirls coming up quite close to where I've cast in. There's definitely fish eating that pellet that I put in earlier. It's proper exciting, and it's heart in the mouth fishing when you can see movements of fish right near to where your float is. And what I'm looking for is, if that float starts moving along the surface, I'll strike. If it starts to pull underneath the surface, I'll strike. If it just sort of bubbles and stays still, or twitches a tiny bit and then stays still, then it's probably fish just brushing the line. But if it confidently pulls across the surface, or it starts to sail under, that's when I know I've got a strike, because a fish has taken the bait. There's still just pinprick bubbles coming up to the left and the right side of my float. Oh, that was a little twitch then. Yeah. That's on. Yes, got him. Ah! I had him for a second, but he came off. I got my drag set. I'm just hoping that I get another chance. That fish that I hooked earlier probably spooked off a few other fish. Oh no, they're back. I can see some more bubbles coming up. Now when there's this many signs of fish in your swim, the bubbles and swirls and stuff, you know it's not going to take too long to get a bite. I got one. It's diving into the pads. Get out there. I've got the rod down low to the left. And by putting side strain on the fish, you can sometimes get them out of the pads. Yep, there he is. We got him. Lovely little common carp. That was so much fun on the float rod. I've just noticed that there's actually a dragonfly or damselfly or something just on the edge of my net. But anyway, here is the carp which I caught on the little piece of corn underneath a twig. I think this just shows that you don't need a lot of time, and you definitely don't need a lot of tackle to catch yourself a carp. Okay, it's not as big as some of the fish you'll see in our other videos, but still a bite, and it's still a lot of fun to catch. This style of fishing with a float certainly lends itself to venues like the one that we're at today. Places that are relatively small, they have quite a lot of fish in them, and they're also quite shallow. I definitely wouldn't try and fish with a little twig as a float and you know, a bit of corn and a shot like this on the line if the lake was 100 acres and very, very deep. I think I'd probably struggle to catch anything. In fact, when we fish on places that are really big with low stock of fish, we do tend to camp out. We tend to do multiple nights, heavy baiting, ledgering rigs, that sort of thing, to try and crack those sorts of venues and catch carp from them. But back to somewhere like this, there's lots of carp in here. The water's quite coloured, the water's very shallow. This sort of setup, this stealthy way of fishing really, really can work very effectively. I think one of the reasons why this sort of setup works so effectively on a place like this is that you can very quietly creep up to the water, lower this twig and a small shot in with a bit of corn on the hook, and you're not going to scare the fish doing that. It's not like casting a big 3-ounce lead on their head or anything like that, you know. A ledgering set up in a place like this, very close to the bank, it would probably work, but this method really does suit this style of fishing, as it's very stealthy, very quiet, a minimal approach to catching these sort of fish. I can see it. I wasn't even looking at the float. I looked away for 1 second and the line pulled tight. Turns out sometimes you don't even need to watch the float. I was looking the other way and it just went wham. There is another long lean common caught on the super stick rig with a bit of corn. Literally turned around to ask Alex a question, and then I felt the line zoom up tight and the fish was on. Just shows that sometimes when they're feeding hard, you don't even need to strike at the right time. But yeah, another bite and a good way to end this session. If you want to know more about catching carp with corn, we've made a specific video about how to get the best out of it. And if you want to just watch some epic carp fishing content, there's a playlist on screen now with our best carp fishing videos. I hope you enjoy them. See ya.